But first, there's been a lot of chat about the Liberal Party, whether Andrew Hastie is challenging or not. I suspect he is. Whether Sussan Ley should be given more of a chance to get her act together, whether it's too early for Jacinta Nampijinpa Price, and so on. A lot of chat, but so far, not much action. So let me give you Rowan's first rule in politics. If you want the Liberal Party to be a successful beacon in Australian politics, pay very close attention when Arthur Sinodinos, John Howard's former right-hand man, Arthur Sinodinos, a former senator in our federal parliament, Arthur Sinodinos, a former Australian ambassador to the United Nations, pay very close attention when he speaks. When Arthur Sinodinos speaks, listen very carefully and listen very, very closely to every single word. Digest it, savour it, mull his advice over like a fine wine, and then spit it out and do the complete opposite. Yes, here's Arthur Sinodinos, the man who was one of the key bedwetters who inflicted the horror prime ministership of Malcolm Turnbull on an unsuspecting Australian public, speaking yesterday on, where else but the ABC.
There's been too much focus on the culture wars and not enough focus on the bread and butter issues that impact Australians. And the Liberal Party should understand that, Australia is very much a centrist country. It's not Labor light to be towards the centre. If you go towards the centre, you're seeking to maximise your vote. You will not find a poultice of votes out on the extreme right. It doesn't exist.
So let's take this bedwetting nonsense step by logical step. Arthur maintains there's been too much focus on the culture wars, not enough on everyday bread and butter issues. First of all, there was zero focus on the so-called culture wars at the last election. None, nada, zilch. The blood even drained from Peter Dutton's face at the mere mention by Jacinta Price when she said the words, "Make Australia great again." At the previous election, Scott Morrison literally put Catherine Deeves into some weird witness protection hideout lest she mutter the words, "Keep men out of girls' locker rooms." The coalition barely mentioned immigration at the last election, merely promising to temporarily cut it by 25% or some other ridiculous number. But more importantly, how out of touch and living in la-la land do you have to be to not realise that the culture wars are bread and butter issues? It is the left, Labor, the Greens and the Teals, who have consistently declared war on our perfectly good culture. That's not far right, that's just fact. And it should be up to the coalition to fight back. That's why Donald Trump won. That's why Nigel Farage looks like winning in Britain. That's why Meloni won in Italy. That's why Javier Milei won. They recognise that everyday bread and butter lives are being devastated by the left's war on our everyday bread and butter culture. The most obvious of which is climate change. The devastating war the left has waged on our once cheap and abundant energy has impoverished bread and butter families, bankrupt bread and butter small businesses across the nation, driven big businesses and all those bread and butter jobs and critical investment from our shores. Farming families, yes, bread and butter farming families are in desperation, in tears, with no end in sight to the rapacious renewables grifters. Our lands are being torn up, our countryside ravaged, and it's only going to get a lot worse under Bowen and Albo. What is more bread and butter than a family barbecue on Australia Day, of singing and enjoying the national anthem, now destroyed and savaged by the left's war on our culture? What's more bread and butter than a family trip to Uluru and getting to climb Ayers Rock, destroyed by the left's war on our culture? What's more bread and butter, or rather Christmas cake and brandy butter, than celebrating a proper Christmas with traditional carols, destroyed by the left's war on our culture? What's more bread and butter than girls only being allowed into the girls' locker room? What's more bread and butter than waving the Aussie flag and only the Aussie flag? The left, through our schools, through our universities, and yes, through the ABC, which has unrelentingly for decades been waging war on the Aussie-rich historical culture that our kids should be marvelling at and should be delighting in and should be inspired by, and instead force-feeding them day in and day out a toxic sludge of identity politics, climate change, alarmism, hysteria, gender fluidity, insanity, and the shame and guilt of their black armband history, and then wondering why half of them are miserable and the other half are depressed. And then we got this unmitigated garbage from Mr. Sinodinos. It's not Labor light to be towards the centre. What is the centre, Mr. Sinodinos, in your rarefied world? You were ambassador to the United States when exactly? Oh yes, during the Biden years, when woke garbage was being exported all around the world. So what is the centre to your way of thinking, Mr. Former Ambassador? Is net zero the centre, Mr. Sinodinos? Is rampant immigration the centre? Is National Sorry Day the centre? Was the voice the centre? Are pronouns the centre? I guess seeing as you're so fond of going on it, the ABC is the centre in your world, is it? Well, Mr. Sinodinos, it is not in mine. I suspect Mr. Sinodinos was responding to the cover of this week's Spectator Australia, of which I'm the editor, where we labelled Sussan Ley as, yes, Labor light, and more importantly, attacked the Liberals' soft left, all things to all people strategy, moving towards the centre, as Mr. Sinodinos would put it, to find more votes. Oh, are there some here? This is the same failed strategy that was also articulated by another former Liberal heavyweight, David Gazzard, on Sharry this week.
People who voted Teal and Green and Independent and the Labor Party didn't do so because the right wasn't engaged in enough culture wars. The politics of this has to be to engage with the community where they're at, not telling them where they ought to be, which is sitting out on the right wing of the party.
So there you have it. The old guard, the Liberal Party, the Sinodinoses and so on, do not want to defend bread and butter Australians from the left's unrelenting culture wars. They want to avoid them altogether and move towards some undefined and mythical centre. Worse, strategists like Gazzard and Sinodinos and Amanda Vanstone piled in as well yesterday. What they are specifically and deliberately telling their Liberal colleagues, they're saying, do not lead, but merely follow. Do not put forward ideas, simply agree with the ones that are already on the table. Do not inspire people to come over to your side, merely run around the paddock like headless chooks, hoping everyone will somehow like you. Do not engage in a battle of ideas, merely wallow in a tepid, lukewarm bathtub of ideas. Yet the facts tell a very different story. The only time since Tony Abbott's landslide that the coalition has won a resounding victory that changed the direction of the nation by changing people's minds with passion and logic and leadership was, of course, during the Voice referendum, when Jacinta Price and Rowan Dean changed the nation's mind. They did not go to where the majority were. They took the majority with them. In the very same week that we saw how young people in America responded to Charlie Kirk, who engaged and inspired them with ideas and with debate, the fuddy-duddies of the Liberal Party want their two best performers, Jacinta Price and Andrew Hastie, to simply follow the old rules. Don't rock the boat. Don't fight the culture wars, or they'll call you a right-wing extremist. Ooh! Simply move towards the centre. That's where the public are. Really, guys? I don't think so.
We used to make complex things in this country. In fact, with cars, we used to say, race them on a Sunday, sell them on a Monday. And it wasn't just a slogan, it was a way of life.
Now, if the Liberals want some advice, some far more insightful advice for the Liberals, came in Nick Dyrenforth's article in the Australian newspaper today, arguing why Andrew Hastie is Labor's worst nightmare, and saying basically what I've been saying for years, that the coalition's future lies with the traditional blue-collar Aussies, those who supported Bob Hawke and supported John Howard, not the inner-city, woke elitists, the Teals. Dyrenforth even gives Hastie the ultimate compliment. He calls him an outsider and predicts that this is what Australia is crying out for: pro-worker, communitarian, and sceptical of neoliberal orthodoxies, i.e. sceptical of a Labor-light, centrist Liberal Party.